One of Eric's ideas is, hey, what if we treated AI more like that? A populist AI. So it becomes a public project like NASA or some other national mission. And he's got a couple ways to do that. So you could take just a profit-based approach. Take profits and distribute them back to the citizens. So if AI is taking away job, you do some kind of pay back to the citizens of the country that enabled the development of that AI. Welcome to Modern Logic for Your Business, where we talk about how to put AI and technology to work in real companies. I'm Andy Braun, and with me, as always, is Dustin Rusnak.
Awesome.
Today, Dustin and we talk about Eric Schmidt, former CEO of Google. Interesting article, think piece he put in the opinion section of New York Times. We talk about Mythos and Soul, the big league AI models that came out of Anthropic and OpenAI in the last few weeks. And then what else we talk about? I don't know. It was a great conversation. So you'll just have to stay tuned.
Long-running sort of potential view of what Fable and Mythos and what these new models mean for the future of technology.
Yeah.
Very interesting conversation.
It was really interesting. So stay tuned. We always find a way, because here at Modern Logic, we are the Wayfinder.
Oh, God.
That started already. Wait, this is only my first cup of coffee, but here's the difference. I've been up since 6 o'clock because it's like 1,000,000 degrees out there, and it's the only time of day you can go outside without melting.
See, the 1950s ad exec ghost that animates your body is coming out more and more. Except he was bad at his job.
But have you looked at ads from the 50s? They are bad.
Yeah,
what were they
know,
thinking?
It's ridiculous.
But I probably would have
AI.
thrived in that. I would have thrived in that. Yeah, what are we saying?
So what do we got today for AI news? And what's caught your eye, Andy?
Okay, I don't know if this is going to be big or one of those like fizzles, but I thought it was interesting, which is that Google's announced that they're putting into Chrome, and what they put in Chrome, the other browsers eventually find a way to match. So this may be coming to a browser to you soon, the ability to run inference right on your local device.
Okay,
and
so
obviously,
what does that actually mean in running inference on your local device?
Most of our handheld devices and desktop computers aren't nearly as powerful as the cloud computers that do inference, like when you talk to Fable from Anthropic or something. But nevertheless, there are smaller models that do run locally, that are capable of being run locally. And it gives you a bunch of advantages. So for one thing, it means that you can run privately and securely on your device because it never leaves. That's a big advantage. And also, in terms of hosting AI, it's basically free because you don't have to pay for the compute to do it. So that could be really big, because I feel like we're in this grace period right now where it's so much of token and inference is subsidized to make sure people get addicted. We're in that drug pusher phase.
We don't know what it's
technology
really costing.
But yeah, we don't know. So building things that run on device, it doesn't matter. It's going to be free to run in terms of a service. That's pretty cool. Obviously, the limitations are pretty big. Like, you can't run really huge large language models on most people's devices. There are some actually small large language models that do fit, but
smaller language models.
Yeah, smaller language models, but they're not as capable. But nevertheless, I think if they're carefully chosen or fine-tuned to a particular application, they could still be really useful. But then, of course, like, there's been so much excitement around LLMs in the last 3 or 4 years. It's like we've forgotten everything else that was AI before that. But those things are still out there. So like vision models, image processing models, a depth evaluation. Like if you have a photograph and you want to imagine what do we think the depth of each part of the picture is, and basic tagging. You have a picture, what are the things in here? All of those technologies are not large language models, and so consequently they're much, much smaller, but still really useful. And so all of that can be brought to device locally. So fast, local, free, secure. It's pretty cool.
So I was reading something else, and I forget what the provenance of this was, but talking about how this sort of mirrors personal computer compute and mobile compute versus cloud compute.
Yeah.
And we've had this thing over the last 50 years where it's gone to the mainframe and then it's gone to the terminal.
Over and over.
And people, by and large, still are using personal devices. They're cloud connected, but we prefer, or seem to prefer, having our information local to us, having it at least secured to us, having a private version. And so the conjecture that I was reading was that private inference is going to be the preference of your average user, because then you're going to be able to move the model closer to you, just like the mobile phone is in your pocket. We used to say it's the most personal device ever because it's always on and knows where you are. And in a similar way, you don't really, even I don't feel 100% comfortable as an AI proponent giving Anthropic or OpenAI access to the kind of data that I would need from an inference model to do very useful things in my personal life.
Actually, I'm really intrigued that you're bringing this up, because I feel like there are all kinds of market forces and tensions that are fighting this. Yes, as a consumer, what you say is true, but I would almost put a caveat, like as a well-educated consumer. So many people just aren't aware of how things work and what their information is being used without their knowledge.
Yeah, and this comes down to the fridge I have that has a big LED panel on it that's running Android. And I was reading through the updates because I'm that kind of nerd. And it's, oh yeah, now we have the right to put ads on your fridge. Not just ads on your fridge, but ads that are personalized based on the things that it can see are in my fridge. And I'm like, this is, yeah, there's nothing particularly proprietary in my fridge. Like, I would happily share with everyone in the podcast, here's a picture of what the inside of my fridge with no embarrassment, but I don't really want my fridge data mined by some massive third-party corporation then sold. And we all know that this is happening, and this is the world that we've opted into. And this is why I think the Apple approach of the private enclave, the local compute, the local inference, I think it's going to be something that is an increasing moat for the people that are the savvy buyers.
But even Apple is so railroaded. You're either all in or not.
Right.
And it's their version or not.
It's shocking that their privacy approach locks you into their hardware and ecosystem. No way could that have been a strategic play on their part, right?
It's really, wish that there were really more choices and more flexibility around how these things work. And hopefully we'll get there at some point. But right now there's only a few big players and they have all the control.
But the other thing about these local inference models, so I'm running Dia, which is a AI-enabled browser. Their AI is out in the cloud, and when I'm browsing and I need to use it, it goes back and forth. One of the other things about these local smaller language models is that there's opportunity for them to already understand not just what you're doing, but close the sort of the cost of building up that context from a time perspective. And so the theory is that they will be faster and faster. And the latency of using these models is another barrier to them being useful day to day. You give them a query, unlike Google, which comes back instantly, they crunch and generate word by word, and you can watch them. And so as we move to these local models, and I'm not saying Chrome's going to get it right. In fact, I would hazard a guess that this is not the final form of what inference looks like for devices. I don't think Chrome has a long history of building out, Google in general has a long history of building out features that then they kill. But I think it's more likely that your operating system is providing some sort of inference capability that the browser is going to be tapping into.
I think it's going to happen, that there will be a browser API for inference. And since Google's the first one to put a stake in the ground, probably that's the shape of the API the other ones will adopt. Yeah. But whether this is as good as it gets, certainly not. We'll see in more and more custom silicon being built, like Apple's neural engine, to run these things faster and faster. Or I think we mentioned that other technology that basically bakes the weights right into a custom fab chip, and it runs like 15,000 times faster. That's the kind of thing that when that's available on a smartphone, that, maybe you can't upgrade the model as easily because it's baked into the silicon. But imagine if you had that kind of power at your fingertips.
There's that line we've talked about forever, which is the good enough line, right? Which is you don't need Fable to do the majority of your daily tasks. You could get away with ChatGPT probably 3.0 way back in March that launched, and have a better experience with it than Siri on any of your surfaces right now, right? By a pretty wide margin, just because the pre-existing pre-LLM models were so bad compared to the capabilities of the new model. And that level of use case, now put something like a sonnet on a mobile device or on a laptop, and you've got an enormous amount of capability unlocked. And the fact that those models are a couple years old now means that we will be able to then address the performance issues. And there's this balance between power and speed. And oftentimes speed is the better choice when you're doing things like asking it to create a reminder for you or turn on an alarm. And these are relatively simple things to get right. And so I would hazard a guess that even the fastest, dumbest open source LLM is probably capable of a higher fidelity, lower error level with more functionality than most of the people's models today. And so this is why it's exciting to see these models move into the devices, because it's a prediction.
In the short term, it's not going to be very much. It's not going to be Sonnet. That's not going to happen. But there are other things that can happen in the near term, which is exciting. And it could be simple things like better kind of grammar checking, photographic things, so on and so forth. But I think in the relatively near future, we'll see devices come out that are capable of doing smallish or medium-sized large language model inference. And that's really when what you're talking about will get unlocked. But there's also, I think I'm already seeing it. This arc from Haiku, say if we talk about Anthropic's models, Haiku, Sonnet, Opus, and now Fable. Those are one axis. Like we're just making it bigger and bigger. And because it's bigger, it's more capable. It can think about more things at once. It can hold, like, in so much as it has a mind, it can hold more ideas in its mind. And that's one way to unlock more capability. But another way to do that is to say we don't need these huge things. If you specialize a model to a particular domain, a smaller one can be just as effective as those huge ones. And that's another space that we're still just barely starting to unlock. And certainly that's not a commodity thing available yet. But if you go to ChatGPT and all you ever talk about is, say, I don't know, if you're a scientist and you study a certain kind of frog or something, and that's all you talk to it about, just you imagine that 99% of the capabilities of that model are going unused. Right. Someone could build a biological amphibian specific chat model that probably would be just as good or even better for those conversations.
It's the difference between, it reminds me of the difference between general purpose processors, like what we all have in our laptops and devices, and specialized processors that are embedded in pretty much every other piece of hardware that, you know, from your car to factories. And they do one thing everywhere. One thing really well. They do it super fast.
I was just talking to your brother the other day about, like, how many computers do you suppose are actually in a MacBook Pro? Obviously, there's the CPU, but then there's GPUs, like the graphics things. But
there's
then
the networking processor,
there's the networking layer, sound. The sound but storage has its own processing unit. The keyboard, the trackpad, every port, like the USB port, has its own dedicated little computers that control how they operate. When you do your fingerprint ID, that's a separate computer. So
now you can extrapolate and say, imagine that world with inference and AI.
So you might have one central processing general purpose model, but it knows how to talk to 20 or 30 other specialized things. And the whole system would be much more efficient. Yeah.
And probably safer and more secure, honestly, because those models will be more sandboxed to specific tasks that they're actually good at. Ideally, right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, but
I feel also, you're fully bought in.
With complexity, anytime you try to build a safe system, the more complexity you have, the more surface area there is that a dedicated attacker could take advantage of. So it's going to continue, as with everything, to be this mixed bag, but on whole, probably worth it. But so anyway, it's interesting that we're taking this conversation, Dustin, because I feel like these capabilities that are going to make it exciting, but also are kind of tempering the adoption of, say, inference in this new browser thing. It really reminds me of this article that was just in the New York Times, written by Eric Schmidt. He was was he a founder or a longtime CEO of Google?
He was the CEO of Google. I'm sure he ran it for the original founders. I think he was the sort of adult in the room they brought in after they IPO'd. But I think ultimately, by and large, he came out of it with a good reputation, and you can't really look at Google and say he didn't do a good job as a CEO,
Yeah, well,
given their where they
yeah,
are now. But this is the same guy that got, if you remember, booed off stage at a college campus for
right.
mentioning AI.
And that this, so
And
how I'm
I'd seen
tying
this
this,
article, and I was
how,
thinking this is a response to that moment for him, right?
and how this ties in is any adoption of any AI technology. It's not just the technology; it's also like the social, the humanity aspect of it.
Right.
And his concern is that kind of the way like America and capitalism is going all into AI right now is maybe not the best approach. There's certainly a lot of people who are upset by it, as evidenced by the booing him off the stage. And so but he's really concerned, like, hey, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, sort of thing. We need to approach
Yeah,
this
I
moment
didn't get a chance to
thoughtfully.
read that. What was his point? I know the original article was we need to somehow address this moment differently, but then they changed the title to something about China, and I didn't actually get a
Yes.
chance to read the
So
article.
I think he had an aha moment because he was traveling and was talking to technologists in China and seeing how they're approaching the adoption there versus, say, in the US. And in some ways, they're much more conservative. They're being careful to not be so disruptive that there would be a lot of unemployment, say, as a consequence of the too rapid of a transition. And so he's saying, hey, we might actually be able to learn something. He's like, not that they're a paragon, not that they're perfect over there, but it's just a different approach. And so he's concerned that we might rebound and end up with so much backlash against AI that large segments of our society end up saying, get it out. And he thinks that would be a mistake to completely dismiss it. The potential for good is really huge when you look at earlier detection of diseases, other advances in science like protein folding, how we can improve farming practices, weather forecasting, disasters, designing of new materials that are beyond the capabilities with current technologies. It just goes on and on. There's so much potential, which is why I think figuring out how to do it in a way that people aren't just like totally
Completely against it.
yeah.
Yeah, one of the dark conjectures that I was talking to an AI futurist a few weeks ago, and we were talking about one of the potentials. One of the potentials of this is we get so many people so angry about it that they basically decide to get rid of all technology and burn everything down to the ground. Amazon, Google, Microsoft, and we end up going back to, hey, why was the internet a good idea? Let's just go back to touching the earth again. And how if we don't manage these sorts of changes correctly, that sounds really far-fetched, but society is a pretty thin layer of
Well, and
built this all of this in 50 years. It can go away pretty quickly if we don't manage our cards
it's
carefully
interesting
and we
that
don't bring people along with us, right?
I said it's interesting that you mention internet because although that really came out of the US military, it was a publicly funded large infrastructure technology project.
Right.
And one of Eric's ideas is, hey, what if we treated AI more like that? A populist AI. So it becomes a public project like NASA or some other national mission. And he's got a couple of ways to do that. So you could take just a profit based approach, take profits and distribute them back to the citizens. So if AI is taking away job, you do some kind of payback to the citizens of the country that enabled the development of that AI. And he talks about models where this has happened before. Australia's got a future fund. I think this maybe is similar to what Norway's done with their petroleum industry. He mentions Singapore has a project. So these are ways to basically take the win and reinvest in society so that it becomes a win for everybody.
So that's the financial.
Yep. So another is to support public interest AI models. These are things that the private sector may not build at all. So he's got examples like, what if we develop models to help you navigate government services and benefits, to help apply for aid and grants? Basically, AI systems that more directly help the people rather than helping companies. It's a very similar technology. It wouldn't be hard to build those things. We just aren't necessarily investing in those or incentivizing companies to do those things right now. And basically opening up that infrastructure so that it's
It's
not
very
just
easy to do through the grant system we've already built,
yep.
right?
And the government can regulate stuff. We've done it before. Look at how railroads were regulated. policy incentivized railroads to do the things that the government wanted to accomplish. So it wasn't all funded through taxation. It doesn't have to be a really big thing on terms of my tax went up to support this. There's a way with just policy you can get these things done. And then the third one he's concerned about is making sure that the way AI integrates and interacts with children and teens is done in a safe manner. And this could be a bipartisan thing, because I think across the aisle, we want to make sure that the children that growing up in this country are protected from technology that is going to potentially harm them in some way. So
I'd note that as the guy who's responsible or connected to the big one of the big model makers does not suggest, unless you haven't gotten to it yet, a public-made, public-run model managed by some agency and then made available to the American people as part of our infrastructure.
I've personally thought of that before. Wouldn't that be cool? But the more I see how much effort it takes, at least right now, to iterate and innovate and do these things, I just feel like it doesn't feel like the way government in the U.S. has worked typically. Like, I know,
well, and capitalism is clearly driving really significant amounts of innovation, and they don't want to mess with that. But it's interesting that it doesn't even come up as a potential concern. I do think I would like to see the government working on providing accessibility to these models to people who may not be able to afford them otherwise, especially the more expensive ones, either through the library system, which was your idea, I thought was really good, or at least through the SBA, through the Small Business Administration. There should be grants available for businesses getting started, especially in the software space, that make these things affordable so that we can provide some access to the opportunity to the job creators and to just the average person looking for a job that may, as we start getting more and more expensive models, creep to the wealthiest corporations. One of my biggest concerns as a small business owner is if Google and Microsoft and the Fortune 50s have access to the mythoses and the fables of the world, and they price everyone else out, we now have a cost of competition that you can't beat with just sweat equity and grit. Intelligence on tap may widen the wealth disparity to the point where you can't compete. You can't create the next Google.
You and I know, as we've started a small business, it already is really hard. That the American myth of pulling yourself, I won't say it's not quite a myth, but the dream, whatever, that pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, it's really hard. There are already a lot of things stacked against you, because obviously the established players always have an advantage. And this is another place where they could, like you said, continue to have more of an advantage. And I think government policy can help level the playing field. Absolutely. But not just for businesses. I think for individuals too. Like, I'm just thinking, like, you think of these traffic cameras out there that record your license plate. I think they have microphones. There's one in the city of Minneapolis. There's this thing that listens, that can isolate anytime a gunshot happens in the city, pinpoints where it is. But now, I'm not sure this is true, but I believe people have realized that those microphones are always recording. So if you happen to walk by one and talk, they will just slurp that up, automatically listen, and feed it to AI, I'm sure. All that's happening against the people. I would love to see AI systems that are acting for the people. And I think part of what Eric is proposing here is we could build systems like that.
Yeah, I think it's he's talking to a reasonable concern here.
Yeah.
And I think those of us who are technologists really need to pay attention to how this technology is being deployed. And I think there's also a reason you're seeing most of the negative press and stories come out of the market-driven Fortune 500 stock market type organizations that are doing their quarterly results. And they're the ones that are looking to use this technology to lay people off and to really change society for the worse. I don't think you have to go too far out on a limb to say that Amazon is probably, their gut reaction to using this technology is not going to be profoundly valuable to the average American citizen.
Right.
With the exception of, you might get a package on your doorstep a few seconds earlier at the cost of someone in a warehouse who has to pee into a jug because
And that's so frustrating because these things could really help people thrive. It doesn't have to just enrich a handful of elites.
And this is why I think having access to it that's driven down,
and it's not just
especially to small businesses.
And it's not just a fairness argument. It is for us to be prosperous into the future. We need to adopt these things and adopt it in a way that everyone is able to thrive because of it. And so we're all stronger together. And so then we're all going forward supercharged. Whereas if it becomes badly implemented, then there's this huge backlash, and then we aren't supercharged, and we won't be able to compete as well as other nations that got their shit together.
Yeah.
So
it's a very real risk, is that the society rejects it, and now we're competing with post LLM and pre LLM societies and lose our technological dominance, which, for better or worse, has driven the American economy for the last 50 years, and certainly driving 90+% of it now. When you look at the market growth that we're all invested in, it's 12 technology stocks basically driving the whole thing, right? There's a very tangible loss if we lose that technology crown because we are rejecting it. But at the same side, you can't just use that as an argument to the people who are rejecting it and say, we have to do this or we're gonna lose to global competition. They don't care. They're going to be harmed by either party, right? And so unless you have a story for how we're going to bring Joe Citizen along and make their lives empirically better with this technology, I think you don't really have a leg to stand on in arguing to that person, hey, we have to do this because it's good for the country. What's good for the country if it's not also good for them? It's a very distant concept that this is good for the country and hence it's good for you.
It's not distant, is Eric's point. But hey, you mentioned Joe Citizen. Do you suppose Joe is listening right now? Joe, are you out there?
Hopefully.
Because I'm thinking Joe might be listening to this conversation and thinking, gosh, I wish these two guys would come help me with my problems at my company. Don't just sit there, Joe, or whatever your name is. We actually are begging for you to call. We want to help you out. And we made it really easy. You can grab a 13 or 30, however many minutes it takes, up to 30-minute conversation to talk to us about what's going on with your business. And we and our amazing staff at Modern Logic could help you out getting AI implemented, automation, searching, all the capabilities that large language models and other inference kind of things can do these days. We can do it. Why? How? What? Get to the point. Just go to molo.now, MOLO.NOW, and book a meeting with us. Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
So third thing I want to talk about. Actually, I think you know more about this than I do. But we have access to Mythos again.
We have access to Fable, which is Mythos, but with some handcuffs. Right. So, I saw someone, this is really interesting. So that anyone who's been following Mythos, they launched and basically said, we're not going to give access to it to everyone because its ability to find security vulnerabilities is truly out of this world, and it could basically break modern technology. So we're going to give it access to all those people. So fast forward a few months, and now we have the Fable model, which is Mythos plus security standards that prevent it from being used for security reasons. So if we run into this even for our basic internal stuff, if you ask it to do something security based, it basically says, no, I won't do that. I'm not allowed to do that. But even that was not enough. And the US government pulled the model and basically said, you cannot use this because anyone who is a foreign national working here, which is basically any modern tech company that is bigger than a certain size, is going to have those people on staff. They cannot use it. And so they effectively banned Fable. And just this last week, Fable went back online with new safeguards that they added. And I saw someone sort of tongue-in-cheek talk about how you can judge a model now. You can't really call yourself the top-of-the-line model if the U.S. government has not at some point made you illegal, which I thought was...
That's pretty funny. This reminds me of, I'm dating myself, but like in the early aughts, Apple announced the G4 Macintosh. And I think they had similar things because that machine's capabilities technically classified it as a supercomputer, which is something from probably the 60s or 70s. and those were highly regulated. And so I think
And
Apple
they
had
couldn't export
they
PlayStations
couldn't.
at one point to Iraq because, and the reality is when you go to places like in the Middle East, some of these countries, those modern processors can be used for weapon systems. They are good enough, right? There's a legitimate concern here, right?
Well,
And so now we've got these LLMs. And so I think the question I saw back when Mythos came out, we knew people who had access to Mythos. So we had some back. People were saying, this is all just marketing. And there's smoke but no fire. And what we knew about Mythos from our security researcher friends at bigger companies was, no, there's fire here, right? We at least had people feeding us information saying, yeah, this is finding vulnerabilities that are really actually concerning. And if everyone could do that, that would probably be bad. So this is legitimate. So now the question is on Fable, is it worth, now that we finally have access to it, is it worth all the praise and the hype?
And also, just to be fair, it's not just Fable, because I think just this week, OpenAI announced that they have what they're calling something even more powerful than Fable called Soul.
Right.
Anthropic named their models based on works of literature, and OpenAI has gone to the Cosmos. So
what are they have Soul, Luna, and
Soul
Terra.
Sola is the big one. Luna is the little one, and Terra is the middle of the road one. I'm guessing they're leaving room at the top, so we might eventually have the universe,
this is an
galaxy.
So I was talking with our good friend Matt Runge this morning, who we're going to have on the podcast in a few weeks, and we were talking about how all OpenAI seems to do is follow Anthropic in some ways, and I feel like their naming, well, cool, is more following of what Anthropic is doing, and like it's really interesting to watch Anthropic really drive the pace of innovation when OpenAI came out with the first piece of technology.
Well, maybe, but also it might be really frustrating that they got scooped by just a few weeks, because they've clearly been working on something the size of Soul for quite a while.
Yeah, and so Soul, I believe, is what, 5.6, and there's rumor that 6.0 of ChatGPT is coming around within the next 4 weeks as well. So we'll see how that goes. But when you look at the models and you compare Soul to Fable, I think what we are seeing from the initial benchmarks is that, yes, Soul is it is almost a Fable class model, but to call it a Fable class model is not, it's not 100% there. In particular, Fable on most metrics is more than 2 times better at coding than Soul is still, which isn't to say that Soul is not a huge leap forward, but Fable is the only model right now you can give large coding tasks and let run for long, significant periods of time.
It's so hard. I can actually tell you a little aside on that. I feel like it might be too soon to really be making these assertions categorically. This weekend, I tried to use Fable for a large coding task, and I've read all these things where it's like, I just gave it a 1 or 2 sentence prompt and it built this whole thing and it was amazing. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to give it a 1 or 2 sentence prompt. I actually ended up maybe a couple paragraphs, but it was a problem domain that's not super obvious that it's right. And I feel like this is the new problem is, even if these things are capable of generating hugely complex systems, how do you know that it's correct? How do you know that it works? That's the next headspace I think people who are in technology have to figure out. It's like, okay, I don't have to write the code anymore, but I do have to guide this thing so that when it claims that it's done, I have a way to evaluate that it actually does the thing I asked it to do correctly and accurately and efficiently, and that it can scale and all those things. And that's where I'm stuck with this project. I still have the window open over here, and Claude's like, all right, I'm all done. And it gave me this table of things it can do, but I didn't actually have it give me like, how do I actually test and use this thing? Which I probably could just ask it for that. But
so the difference, if I had to sum it up, and there was a great blog post, we'll have to look it up and put it in the show notes, with a person, he's been using AI and he used this model he's asked the last few models to build this old school travel map that shows the distance between cities based on travel time. And the map is actually skewed based on how you would get from one place to another place and the cost and time of doing that. And Fable is the first model that actually generated the whole thing all the way through, and it was basically done. And he said, this is the first model where I felt less like a director So that the comparison is, with the early models, you had more like fancy autocomplete, and then you had more like a junior coworker, and then you had more like a senior employee who was working for you. And that's where we are with Opus, right? A team of senior employees. And now with Fable, it's more like, I'm just the patron, and I hired this company or this artist to go make something for me. And then they go off and they do that, and they come back and it is functionally complete. And now I, as the patron, have to decide, do I like the art or not? And I think that's
Yeah.
actually a really interesting point, because I had this experience. I was talking at my computer while I was doing my dishwasher through my AirPods, and I had Fable build me a video game, because I'm a gamer, and in a genre that I really like, which is called idle clickers. And if you're not into them, don't get into them. They're highly addictive. And I was just doing the dishes, and it went off and crunched, and it built, as far as I can tell, having played with it all weekend, a functionally complete, bug, almost 100% bug free idle video game, top to bottom, that fully works with a handful of paragraphs. The problem is, because I gave it a handful of paragraphs and I didn't specify what the design ethos was, and I didn't specify the elements down to how I wanted it to work, it made a hell of a lot of decisions, just like an artist would, like the patron model, that I disagree with. It made a pretty boring video game, right? A game that
Yeah.
doesn't fully capture what I wanted out of an idle game. And I'm sitting here clicking, going like, this doesn't have the thing that makes this a genre that works for me as a gamer. And when you look at it, it's because I didn't articulate what that was. I didn't even take the time to understand what that was. And so how could it have gotten that done? But Fable will happily go and build a functionally complete thing, which is what, that's the innovation that Fable brings to the table. But it still needs to know enough about what you're building to do a good job, because otherwise it's going to build the complete thing and it's going to make its own damn decisions about what that means.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds or thousands of decisions in any given product that are made usually by the product owner and sweated by the team over 6 months. It just did in 30 minutes based on some average that it has of all human ingenuity.
Right.
And it's going to do a pretty average job, right?
This is why I think you can't take humans out of the production cycle, because first of all, you can't capture all of your opinions up front, because so many of those are formed when it happens. I know it when I see it. How many clients have come back to it and said, I'll know it when I see it? And we've been very frustrated as developers by that, because we would have to build the whole thing using our best understanding of what was being asked of us, only to have the client turn around and say, no, that's not what I want at all.
Well, and we learned really early and that we will show the clients the design, and we will get the prototype out quick, and to try to give them stuff. And even then you do all of that and they get the final version and they still want changes. And it's so, but it's a whole skill set to capture this information over time. And we're shortening that to a 30-minute period and handing off to an entire machine. And so while it is incredibly exciting, it doesn't mean that that the human isn't an integral part of the experience. But I do think what I'm feeling from using Fable, because I've gone back and forth with it on this project now, and I've made a bunch of changes to how the model works, is that this is very much like having I don't want to stress the art model too much, so let's move to home renovators and architects. This is like hiring an architect to build an extension on your house. You could basically say, yeah, I trust you, do what you want, I need a new bathroom, I'm going to Thailand and Europe for 6 months and I'll be back and we'll see what happens, right? You're probably not going to get something you love out of that experience. So
let me give you a counterexample.
This is the example of, they come in, they show you the tile. Oh, I like that tile. And this is what I was thinking. And this is the experience now of working with a model like Fable, is you have to be involved in making the choices all along the way.
Okay, let me give you a counterexample though. You're talking about a greenfield kind of project. But actually there are tons of things that are out there already, really well specified, but that have a ton of need for upgrades. And I'm speaking basically to technical debt. And actually we talked to a company just last week that has this. So what they need is fully specified, but it's specified in Microsoft Visual Basic from 1999, and it's specified in SQL that runs against SQL Server from 2003. We don't need any new decisions made. We know exactly what this needs to do. But to take that and turn it into a modern application, I feel is something that could probably be done by a model like Fable, especially under the guidance of an expert engineering team like ours.
Yeah, I would say the issue there becomes, I would guess Fable will get you 80% reduction in cost on that project. So when at the scope and scale that they're at, like my initial gut pre-AI was that this would be an unaffordable migration project for them.
Yeah,
at the
millions of dollars.
Most companies, it's millions of dollars, right?
Yep.
30 years of R&D, entrenched decision making, code very few people even understand anymore, in languages very few people know anymore or use. So all of these things,
platforms that the vendor no longer supports.
Yeah, there's a reason why everyone jokes about banking still being on COBOL and old IBM stuff, because it is, because the expense of migrating even a single bank to a modern platform is. And I used to run a banking consultancy. It was one of my first companies. The expenses, literally, we would watch people spend hundreds of millions of dollars and fail to migrate some of these projects, right? And Y2K, which is why Y2K was such a big, expensive thing. So I think now, post-Fable, this project becomes affordable, because I think you can see at a minimum something like a 80% cost reduction, if not more, in these migration tasks. And now the new work is understanding what the target architecture is, specifying it, validating it, testing and making sure that
and capturing all the requirements
done
because
well.
It's now a new problem, which is it does the thing that it does. No one can tell you all the things it does, but they know it when they go to use it, it does it right. But you have to extract all of those requirements out of a sort of working system. If you have a Windows XP box, it still works. So you have to extract that out of that and then build
some ancient system you can barely. And this is something that the software side of our business is weirdly doing a lot more of lately. I think because of the expenses coming down is, hey, we've got this legacy system and we need to update it. Can you get the data off of it, or can you migrate this? And now that these are affordable things, but I think the issue now becomes, doing that job well still requires a significant amount of understanding what these systems, both the past state of what they look and the present state of where we want to bring them up. But I think that other thing is, I used to tell people all the time, don't rewrite. That was like that would be the drum I would beat forever, right? Is rewrites will kill your business. It's better to patch the existing software and incrementally move the stuff that you need to.
It probably still is a good idea, to be honest.
Yeah, but I think we are approaching a world, because the cost of building something new is so low, the cost of rewrites is starting to be a point where we're getting to the point where you might be willing to play and try things, to do one-offs, to spend a week doing a one-shot to see what does this really look like. And instead of hiring a team of BAs for 6 to 8 months to dig through and document what is this system doing, it might be simpler to just say, let's give it a shot for 2 weeks, spend 10 grand and see where we land, see how much functionality we can get. And I think we're also ending a world where startups might be, instead of spending weeks and weeks defining or months building out the product, doing paper prototypes, building real technology that they can put in the hands of the consumer and say, how does this feel versus this? And we've built 2 versions of the same dang app because the cost of building is so much lower for us that we can not now do these things. In a similar way, we're talking about getting rid of things like WordPress and moving straight to static content management, because we can generate that content with these new models.
No, I totally agree with a lot of what you're saying. But also, there has to be a measured approach, because, for example, large language models will, without telling you, tend to drop stuff. And so you might believe it when it says, I'm all done, here's your new app. And then you go and look at the context menu and some menu items are missing, or it forgot that your app was localized before and that's gone, or it forgot that it was accessible before and that's gone. So you do have to somehow be very rigorous about capturing all those requirements, and especially when there is no other documentation. So iterating on that phase to really understand what it is that it needs to do and making sure that's fully specified. That's a big
But
part of the task.
I also think, especially with this new class of models, it's probably going to get a lot more of that right than the previous class models. But what it anytime it runs into something it does not explicitly have instructions on how to do, which migration projects are filled with these, right? Oh, this library that it's using no longer exists. What should I do?
Yeah.
The Fable class model is going to solve that problem without telling you it was even a problem or asking you what it should do. And the solution it picks out of the hat might be less than ideal for what you want to do.
It might just be like, oh, I'll just put a stub in here, fix
Right.
me, and it just
or
returns.
it'll be like, oh, I just recreated libcurl because I didn't realize that libcurl was a thing. And so I just rebuilt it from scratch. And by the way, I decided since there was no password store, I would just write a text file and put the passwords in there. Then we were going to. So it's going to be making more and more decisions. And one of the problems with tools this powerful is you are basically abdicating anything you don't put in the prompt. You are basically saying, I trust you.
Well, it also becomes to the point where it's not humanly possible to actually review what it built directly. Mm-hmm. It's just too much. And so it becomes more around the process of how do you get other models to review this model, or how do you build an architecture such that the kinds of mistakes you're afraid of really can't be made. Yeah. For example, if you're choosing a really rigorous programming language that just doesn't allow certain classes of mistakes to be made at all. But those only take you so far, and that it moves the kinds of problems that remain further and further up the conceptual ladder. So they become more about race conditions and deadlocks and some of the really hard to reason about issues. It's like, those will be the things left for us to deal with.
And I think there's going to be, I think you nailed it, right? I think I had a friend talk to me. Do you remember Microsoft Access? So this was like a database, but it's a database that pretty much like Excel, anyone in the company can pick up and in a few weeks create something that resembles a software application, right?
Yeah.
And anyone who's been at Fortune 5,000 businesses understands that 95% of the technology in those organizations is stuck either in an Excel spreadsheet or a Microsoft Access database or a Visual FoxPro database, which is an equivalent to that, or something that, because the cost of hiring a team like us to come in to solve this particular calculation was not worth it. And so Jim from accounting, who's pretty freaking sharp at accounting, just built the system in the spreadsheet. And then someone else, some 20-year-old kid at Ecolab, no one in this room, certainly, went in and automated the crap out of it with Visual Basic 6, and now it's still running today, right? And so the reason I told that long-winded story is we are going to see, someone said, this is the new Microsoft Access. Yeah. We are going to see an explosion of tooling inside companies that was previously relegated to companies like ours with deep technical expertise. And that is going to create a huge amount of productivity and value for these businesses, but they're going to end up having to manage 1,000 times more scope of software running their day-to-day business. And so that, I think, is where the technologists like us end up being, is we're going to be back to, okay, we're the team you call when the software connection won't work, or when Jane in accounting fat-fingered something and something broke, right? And keeping that stuff maintained as these businesses start taking more of the control of their technology destiny in-house, just means there's going to be more technology than ever to manage and maintain. Yeah. And so I think I'm very excited for that world. I started my career in that world. I can tell you, like, our ability to assist at a cost that's much more affordable, but come in and be the wizard and be like, yeah, I made that 10,000 times faster for you. It now works 10,000 times, literally faster, and it took me a half hour, right?
In a weird way, I feel like we're coming kind of full circle back to Eric Schmidt's thesis of these technologies need to be brought to the people.
Yeah.
And that's what we're saying here is, yeah, that is going to happen. Everyone's going to be using these things and making things faster and actually solving the processes of day to day. But also it does create opportunities for the folks who are able to be the ones, the superheroes, that come in when, yeah, sometimes it goes off the rails, or someone retires and they have this whole backlog of stuff they built.
Or it's great, we've got the prototype, now we need the bulletproof production system.
Yep.
And I think Fable is a deeply exciting, I honestly thought we were going to get this more towards the end of the year, like in terms of its capabilities. It still has a long way to go. We still have a long way to go with LLMs, but Fable is, I think, the first model where I can see that the production infrastructure could potentially be run by a product manager in a way that's functional versus a team of engineers, because before it would make so many bugs and so many mistakes. And now you'll still make bugs and mistakes, but now the product manager can see that bug and say, I need you to fix that because that's not working right. And Fable will happily go and do that. And it's a step in the direction of that world. And I think that we continue to go in a meaningful direction that we can understand.
And we all need to figure out how to use it. And okay, the writing the code part is really easy now. Now we got to make the rest of the process accelerate too. So it's going to be a never-ending optimization problem, as such problems
we're squeezing the toothpaste tube, and look, there's just more and more just different bottlenecks in the tube that we need to understand. And I think that's the other thing, is fully understanding the cultural and the process implications of technology you can create more quickly. It doesn't just magically make all your problems go away, and in fact it can amplify it puts pressure on every other piece of the production chain, from quality control to delivery to data, to up the game, because now that the traditional bottleneck that used to take 6 months takes 6 weeks, now everything else has to accelerate too. And guess what? AI can't help in some of those cases.
You know what? We need to have Claude help us accelerate next.
Our podcast?
This podcast, we've done it again. We've filled basically an hour talking about this stuff. And I know when we started this morning, before I hit record, I had a fourth topic to talk about. And you were like, no, I think we have enough. So
I think we'll be good. I think we'll be good with the 3.
Yeah. Thank you out there. Thanks for joining us. I'll just say it again. If you're exploring AI or have something specific you want us to solve, the best next step for you is to talk through it with us. Just go to molo.now. That's MOLO.NOW. You can book a 30-minute session with me or Dustin. And if you know you want to talk specifically to Dustin, just go to molo.now/Dustin.
Or molo.now/Andy if you want to talk to Andy. He's way nicer than I am. Go talk to Andy.
And we'll talk through whatever's on your mind and see if there's some way that Modern Logic can help you solve those problems. Or maybe you want to throw a question in the hamper for something we should talk about on our next episode of the podcast. If you want to do that, just head on over to modernlogic.io/podcast. You can find links to follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and all those platforms. You can leave comments, and we read the comments. We had 4 comments this week, you said. And we feed that into our idea generation for what we're going to talk about next. So please do that. Our show is produced and edited by Brian Peterson, with additional contributions from Dylan Brusnak, Anna Spitz, and Beth Davis. Our AI mascot was created by the artist Becca Ron. Our theme music is Elastic Vibe by Ziv Moran. If you find the show useful, share it with someone who you think would benefit from listening to it. And then take a moment to rate and review. It really does make a difference. Modern Logic for Your Business is a production of Modern Logic. See you next time.